I never told my daughter about my $75,000 a month salary. She thought I was living on pennies. Her husband said, "Enough living in my house, go to a nursing home." I left quietly. A month later, I became the new owner of his house. Good day, dear listeners. It's Clara again. I'm glad you're here with me. Please like this video and listen to my story till the end, and let me know which city you're listening from. That way I can see how far my story has traveled. I never meant for any of this to happen. That is the first thing I want you to understand. I am not a woman who craves conflict. I am not someone who collects grievances the way some people collect porcelain figurines or old newspaper clippings. I am Margaret Ellen Calloway, 71 years old, retired senior financial analyst, former holder of a government security clearance, and, for the better part of 2 years, a quiet guest in my own daughter's house. The house was on Birchwood Lane in Glendale, California, a pale yellow colonial with a 2-car garage and a Japanese maple in the front yard that Lindy, my daughter Linda, had planted the year she got married. I remembered helping her dig the hole for it. I remembered the dirt under my fingernails and the way she laughed when the tree tilted slightly to the left and we had to prop it up with a stick. That was 17 years ago. She was 31 then, full of plans. The plans, I had noticed, had mostly become Craig's plans by the time I moved in. Craig Mercer, my son-in-law, a man with thick forearms, a loud laugh, and the peculiar habit of speaking about money in a tone that suggested he was the only person in any room who truly understood it. He sold commercial real estate. He drove a leased BMW. He called me Marge, even though no one in my 71 years of life had ever called me Marge, and I had asked him politely 3 times not to. I had moved in after my hip replacement. The surgery went well, but the recovery was slow, and my condominium in Pasadena was on the 3rd floor with no elevator. Linda had suggested it herself, standing in the hospital hallway in her good coat, her voice warm and certain. "Come stay with us, Mom, just until you're back on your feet. We have the room." She meant it then. I believe that. I still believe that. What I did not fully anticipate was Craig. The first month was fine. I stayed in the guest room, which smelled of cedar, and had a window that looked out onto the backyard. I cooked twice a week. I am a very good cook, a fact Craig acknowledged by eating second helpings without comment. I paid for groceries when I went with Linda. I did not complain about the television volume or the hours Craig spent on the phone after dinner, pacing the living room in his socks, talking about cap rates and closing ratios to people I never met. But somewhere around the 6-week mark, something shifted. It began with small things. The way Craig would say at the dinner table, "Well, when you're living on a fixed income, you can't really understand how much things cost." I was living on a fixed income technically. My pension from 30 years at the federal government, plus Social Security. He was not wrong. He was also not speaking to me. He was speaking about me to Linda, in that particular tone men use when they want a woman to feel peripheral to her own life. Then there was the matter of the guest bathroom. Craig mentioned once, and then again, and then a third time, in slightly different words, that the hot water heater serviced both the guest bathroom and the master bath, and that long showers were, financially speaking, not ideal. I began taking 5-minute showers. I timed them. It did not seem to satisfy him. Linda said nothing. That was perhaps the thing that worried me most. My daughter, who had once argued with a school principal for 45 minutes over a grading error, who had driven 4 hours to protest a highway expansion through a wetland, who had strong opinions about everything from pension reform to sourdough starter. My Linda said nothing. She watched. She smoothed things over. She became, before my eyes, a woman who smoothed. Still, I told myself it was temporary. My hip was healing. I had begun my morning walks again, short ones at first. then longer. I had my laptop, my reading glasses, my cup of Earl Grey at 6:30 in the morning before anyone else woke up. I had my routines, and within them, I had something resembling peace. Until the Tuesday evening in March. We had been at the dinner table, chicken piccata, which I had made, with the capers Craig claimed to dislike but always ate. The conversation had moved, as it often did lately, to money. Craig had had a deal fall through that week. He was not hiding his mood. He talked about market conditions, about difficult clients, about the general ingratitude of people who did not understand the effort involved in what he did. And then, almost conversationally, he turned to Linda and said, "Honestly, at some point we've got to talk about this arrangement. I'm not running a charity. If your mother can't contribute properly, there are facilities designed for exactly this situation. Nice ones. She could be comfortable." He did not look at me when he said it. Linda looked at her plate. I looked at Craig Mercer, at his thick forearms resting on my daughter's table, at the fork in his hand, at the certainty on his face, and I said nothing. I folded my napkin. I excused myself. I walked to the guest room. He sat on the edge of the cedar-scented bed and thought, very quietly and very carefully, about what I was going to do next. Because Craig Mercer had made one serious miscalculation that evening. He thought he knew who I was. He did not know who I was. I sat on that bed for a long time. The house was quiet, except for the sound of Craig's voice in the kitchen, lower now, and Linda's occasional murmur, and the distant hum of a neighbor's lawnmower somewhere out on Birchwood Lane. The light through the window was the particular gold of a California evening in March, warm and indifferent, the way the light here always seemed to be. I was frightened. I want to be honest about that. I was 71 years old, and my hip still ached on cold mornings, and I had not lived alone since the surgery, and the thought of being placed somewhere, of being managed, sat in my chest like a stone. But underneath the fear, something else was moving, something older and quieter and considerably more dangerous. I got up and opened the closet. Behind my winter coats, inside a zipper pocket of the large gray suitcase I had brought from Pasadena, there was a manila folder. In that folder was a document that Craig Mercer had apparently forgotten about entirely. Let's go back 3 years. Craig had come to me in a moment of financial difficulty. A deal had gone sideways. He had committed personal funds as part of a good faith deposit on a commercial property. The deal collapsed, and he was, as he put it, temporarily illiquid. He needed $40,000 for approximately 90 days to cover a shortfall before another deal closed. He had a plan. He had documentation. He was, he assured me, good for it. Linda had looked at me with those eyes, the ones that had been asking me for things since she was 4 years old. I was a financial analyst. I knew how these situations worked. I was also her mother, which is a different kind of knowing entirely. I gave him the money. But I was not naive. I had drawn up a simple promissory note, properly witnessed, properly notarized, in which Craig acknowledged the debt of $40,000, agreed to a repayment schedule, and offered as collateral a lien on the Birchwood Lane property. The house. His house. The pale yellow colonial with the Japanese maple. Craig had signed it at the kitchen table on a Sunday afternoon with the ease of a man who fully expected to repay the loan in 90 days and never think about it again. He never repaid it. Oh, he made 2 payments, one of $5,000, one of $3,000, and then the payment stopped. And when I mentioned it, he said something about a difficult quarter, and then about timing. And then at some point, it simply ceased to be discussed. I had not pressed. I am not a woman who likes conflict, as I said. And Linda had seemed uncomfortable whenever the subject arose, in the particular way people are uncomfortable when they suspect an injustice, but prefer not to examine it. $32,000 remained outstanding, plus interest. 3% annually, as specified in the note. The note that was still valid. The note that was still notarized. The note that still carried, as security, a lien on the property at 1847 Birchwood Lane, Glendale, California. I sat with the folder in my lap and thought about Craig's words at the dinner table. Facilities designed for exactly this situation. I thought about Linda's eyes on her plate. I thought about 5-minute showers and the word Marge and every small, systematic diminishment of the past 2 years. Then I opened my laptop and began to look up real estate attorneys in the greater Los Angeles area. I was not angry, precisely. Anger burns hot and fast and makes people careless. What I felt was something more like the quiet of a woman who has spent 30 years reading contracts and balance sheets and who has just, finally, decided to read the one that matters most to her. I had not told Linda about my finances. This was deliberate, and I had my reasons. After her father died, 12 years ago now, I had watched money change relationships. I had watched my sister's children orbit her like satellites in proportion to their awareness of her net worth. I had decided, early on, that the people in my life would know me as Margaret, not as a figure in a ledger. What Linda did not know, what Craig certainly did not know, was that my federal pension was substantial. 30 years as a senior analyst, rising to a GS-14 pay grade, plus a deferred compensation account from 20 years of maximum contributions, plus the investments I had made quietly, steadily, over the course of my adult life. Nothing dramatic, nothing clever, just the patient compounding of a woman who understood numbers and kept her head. My monthly income, between pension, Social Security, and investment distributions, was approximately $7,500. My total liquid and investment assets were, at the time, I sat on that bed with the manila folder in my lap, somewhat north of $900,000. Craig Mercer had looked at a 71-year-old woman recovering from hip surgery and seen a liability. He had not seen the folder. The attorney I found was named Patricia Owens. Her office was in Pasadena, near my old condominium, in fact, and her reviews described her as methodical, unsentimental, and formidably effective. Those were the exact 3 words I was looking for. I called her office the next morning, from my cell phone, in the backyard, while Craig was at work and Linda was at her Pilates class. I told Patricia's assistant that I had a matter involving a notarized promissory note, a real property lien, and an outstanding debt of $32,000 plus accrued interest. I said I would like a consultation at the earliest available date. The appointment was scheduled for Thursday. I went back inside, made my Earl Grey, and sat in the kitchen in the morning light. The Japanese maple outside the window moved slightly in the breeze. I had helped plant that tree. I remembered the dirt. I remembered the laughter. I thought, it still tilts a little to the left. Patricia Owens's office was on the 2nd floor of a Spanish Revival building on Marengo Avenue, the kind of building that looked like it had survived several earthquakes with dignity intact. The waiting room had dark wood paneling, framed botanical prints, and a receptionist who offered coffee without being asked. I liked it immediately. Patricia herself was perhaps 55, with close-cropped silver hair and reading glasses on a chain. She sat across from me at a wide oak desk and listened without interrupting, which is rarer than it should be. I placed the manila folder on the desk between us. I explained the history, the loan, the promissory note, the lien, the partial repayments, the silence that had followed. She read the document carefully, twice. She took off her glasses and looked at me. "This is properly executed," she said. "Notarized, witnessed, the lien description is legally sufficient. Under California Civil Code, this lien is enforceable. The outstanding principal plus accrued interest at 3% over 3 years represents approximately $34,800. The collateral, the property at 1847 Birchwood Lane, would be subject to foreclosure proceedings if the debt is called due and remains unpaid. Is it valid if I am currently living in that property? I asked. She paused. That is an interesting question. Your status as a resident does not invalidate the lien. The lien is on the property, not contingent on your residency. However, if you are forcibly removed, for example, if the property owner demands you vacate, there could be an argument that the circumstances of the debt have materially changed in a way relevant to enforcement. I would recommend initiating the formal demand process before any change in your living situation, if possible. I told her about the dinner table, about Craig's words, about Linda's silence. Patricia Owens regarded me for a long moment without expression. Mrs. Calloway, she said, I would like you to authorize me to send a formal demand letter for repayment of the outstanding debt. We will give Mr. Mercer 30 days to satisfy the obligation in full. If he does not, we proceed to lien enforcement. What does lien enforcement look like, practically speaking? I asked, because I wanted to understand it exactly. It means filing a notice of default. It means, ultimately, that if the debt is not resolved, the property can be sold to satisfy it. Or, more commonly in cases like this, the debtor refinances or arranges alternative financing to pay the creditor rather than risk losing the property. And if the property is currently financed with a mortgage? The mortgage lender holds first position. Your lien is in second position. But the practical leverage is real. No one wants a lien enforcement action on their property. It affects their credit, their refinancing options, their ability to sell. Most people resolve these quickly once they understand you are serious. I authorized her to proceed. I drove back to Birchwood Lane with the windows down. The March air was cool and smelled of orange blossom. Someone nearby was growing citrus. I thought about Patricia's word, serious. I had been serious my entire adult life. Seriousness, I had found, was something women my age were rarely credited with until it became undeniable. When I came inside, Linda was in the kitchen. She looked up from her phone with an expression I recognized, the particular studied casualness of someone who has been waiting. "Where were you?" she asked. "Errands," I said. "Craig said you took the car to Pasadena." I had not told Craig I was going to Pasadena, which meant he had tracked the car. The shared family sedan, technically Linda's car, which I was permitted to borrow, apparently reported its location through an app Craig had installed for insurance purposes. "I had a doctor's appointment," I said. It was not entirely false. Patricia Owens had been, in a manner of speaking, exactly what I needed. Linda looked at me a moment longer than necessary. Then she looked back at her phone. That evening, I could hear them. Craig's voice from the other side of the guest room wall. Not the words, just the cadence. The low, insistent rhythm of a man making a case for something. Linda's voice, quieter. Then Craig, again. Then silence. I lay in the cedar-smelling dark and understood that the situation had a momentum to it now. Patricia had said she would send the demand letter by the end of the following week. 30 days after that, the clock would run. I thought about the tree in the front yard, the way it tilted slightly, the way we had propped it up. Some things need a prop. Some things need instead to be replanted entirely. 2 days later, Craig came to find me in the backyard where I was reading. He sat down across from me in the garden chair with a studied ease that I recognized as performance. Margaret, I want to apologize about the other night. The dinner thing. That was poorly phrased." I put down my book. I looked at him. "What were you trying to say, Craig?" I asked. He looked slightly caught. "Just, long term, we've got to think about what makes sense for everyone. That's all I meant." "I appreciate you clarifying," I said. I picked up my book. He sat for another moment. Then he went inside. He did not know that Patricia Owens was already drafting a letter on cream-colored stationery that would arrive at 1847 Birchwood Lane, addressed to Craig Robert Mercer, within 6 business days. He would know soon enough. The letter arrived on a Wednesday. I know this because I was watching for it, not anxiously, but with the particular attention of someone who has set a plan in motion and wants to observe its effects clearly. I was at the kitchen window with my Earl Grey when the mail carrier came up the walk. I saw the envelope. Cream, formal, the return address of Owens & Associates in the upper left corner. Craig got the mail. He always got the mail. I watched him flip through the envelopes on the front step. I watched him stop. I watched him read the return address. I watched the stillness that came over him. The particular stillness of a man who has received information his body has processed before his mind has caught up. He came inside. He did not look at me. He went directly down the hall to his home office and closed the door. I finished my tea. Linda found out within the hour. I could trace the arc of it through the house. Craig's voice, then silence, then Linda's footsteps, then the guest room door opening, slowly, as if she were hoping to find someone other than her mother sitting there. "Mom?" Her voice was careful. "What is this?" "It's a formal demand for repayment of a legal debt," I said. "The promissory note your husband signed 3 years ago. I had it reviewed by an attorney." "You hired an attorney?" "Yes." Linda sat on the edge of the bed. She had her mother's coloring, gray coming into the blonde now, something I had always thought looked distinguished. And at that moment she wore an expression I had not seen since she was a teenager. The one that meant she had hoped, very much, that the adult in the room would make the problem go away. And the adult in the room was not going to. "Mom, that money, Craig always intended to pay it back. We've had difficult years. You know the market." "Linda." I kept my voice even. "I gave Craig $40,000. He repaid $8,000. He has not addressed the remaining balance in over 2 years. I have given him considerable time. But why now? Why like this? A lawyer." I thought about saying, "Because your husband told me at your dinner table that I should be deposited in a facility." I thought about saying, "Because you looked at your plate." I thought about saying many things. Instead, I said, "Because it is the appropriate process." Craig came in 20 minutes later. He had composed himself, but not entirely. His face was the particular shade of a man whose competence is being questioned in his own house by a 71-year-old woman, and who finds this intolerable. "Margaret." He never called me Margaret. "I want you to understand that this is an extremely hostile action. We have taken you in. We have supported you through a difficult recovery. And this is how you respond? By sicking a lawyer on us?" "I haven't sicked anything," I said. "I asked an attorney to send a demand letter for a legal debt. That is routine. This is my house. I am aware. I want you to know," he said, lowering his voice, "that if you persist with this, things are going to become very uncomfortable for you here. Very uncomfortable. You should think carefully about your situation." Was that a threat? Let us be precise. It was a threat. Not an unusual one, not a particularly sophisticated one, but a threat nonetheless. The suggestion that my physical shelter was contingent on my legal cooperation. I looked at Craig Mercer and felt something pass through me that was not quite anger, not quite contempt, but something in the family of both. A clear-eyed recognition of exactly what kind of person I was dealing with. "I have thought carefully about my situation for some time," I said. "I appreciate your concern." He stared at me. Then he left. Linda came back that evening, alone, to try a softer approach. Appeals to family, to history, to the damage this could do to her marriage. I listened. I said I was sorry she was in a difficult position. I said I hoped Craig would resolve the matter quickly. I did not change my position. Over the following days, Craig made 2 additional attempts. One was a document he had apparently found online and printed himself. Something about limitations on lien enforcement that he presented to me over breakfast, as though he had discovered a legal loophole. I read it politely and said I would pass it along to my attorney. Patricia called it creative but inapplicable and sent a 1-paragraph response. The other was an indirect suggestion, relayed through Linda, that I might receive a goodwill payment of $10,000 if I agreed to release the lien entirely. I declined. Then, abruptly, the pressure stopped. Craig went to a conference in Phoenix. The house became quiet. Linda moved around me like we were 2 planets in cautious orbits, each uncertain of the other's gravity. I used the quiet deliberately. I drove back to Pasadena. I had lunch at a small Italian restaurant on Lake Avenue that I had liked for 20 years. I sat by the window with a glass of Pinot Grigio and the chicken Milanese, and I watched the street and did not think about Craig Mercer for exactly 1 hour. Sometimes the bravest thing is simply to sit down and eat. I needed that. I needed to remember who I was outside of 1847 Birchwood Lane, the woman who had gone to graduate school on a scholarship, who had navigated 30 years of federal bureaucracy, who had raised a daughter largely alone after her husband's death, and found, to her own mild surprise, that she was stronger alone than she had expected. The clock was running. 30 days from the letter. I ordered dessert. Craig came back from Phoenix with a tan and a changed tactic. The aggression was gone. Or rather, it had been dressed in different clothes. He was friendly at dinner. He asked about my hip, my morning walks, whether I had found the new mystery novel I had been looking for at the library. He complimented the soup I made on Thursday, which was a good butternut squash soup and deserved the compliment. But I noticed the compliment and noted its timing. On Saturday morning, he knocked on the guest room door and asked if we could talk. We sat in the living room. The light through the front window caught the Japanese maple outside, throwing leaf shadows across the carpet. Craig had a folder of his own this time. Professionally printed, spiral-bound, the kind of thing he prepared for clients. "I've had our accountant put together a full picture," he said, opening it on the coffee table between us. "The $32,000, the interest, it all comes to about $35,000. I want to pay it. I genuinely do. But right now, Margaret, our liquidity is. Patricia will require documentation of your current financial position if you are requesting an extension," I said. He blinked. "Right. Of course. I wanted to talk to you personally, without the lawyers, because at the end of the day, we're family." I looked at him. "We are," I agreed. "And I want to make this right. I am going to make this right. I'm asking you, as family, for a little more time. 60 days. And as a gesture of good faith, I'm prepared to give you $20,000 now, today. And we release the lien, tear up the note, and we move forward." There it was. $20,000 for a $35,000 debt, in exchange for releasing the lien on a property worth, according to the Zillow estimate I had checked the previous week, $780,000. I thought about it for exactly the amount of time it deserved. "Craig," I said, "I appreciate the offer. I'll let Patricia know you've made one." His face tightened, very slightly. "I was hoping we could handle this without—" "I understand that. But I have legal representation, and I'm going to use it." He closed the folder. He stood up. He was not angry this time. He was something quieter than angry, which I found, if anything, more informative. Quiet men who are used to controlling things have a specific quality of stillness when something is not going their way. I went for my walk. It was on that walk, along the streets west of Birchwood Lane, the blocks I had learned over the past 2 years, the ones with the bougainvillea and the house with the 3 orange cats who always sat on the wall, that I ran into Dorothy Chen. Dorothy was 74 and had lived 2 streets over for 30 years. We had met at the neighborhood farmers market the previous spring and had fallen into an occasional pattern of walking together on mornings when our schedules aligned. She had worked as a paralegal for 20 years before retiring. She grew vegetables in raised beds in her backyard. She did not suffer fools. I told her, on that walk, more than I had told anyone. Not everything. I was still careful, still measured. But enough. The dinner table remark. The promissory note. Craig's offer that morning. She listened without interrupting, which was the second time that month I had been grateful for that quality in a person. You need more than a lawyer, she said when I finished. You need witnesses and documentation of your living situation. Do you have that? I did not. Come Thursday, she said. There's a senior advocacy group, meets at the library on Brand Boulevard, run by a woman named Helen Marsh. She's a retired social worker, and she knows every angle of elder financial abuse, residential coercion, the works. Come and just listen. I went Thursday. The group met in a carpeted room off the main library floor, 12 people around folding tables, most older than me, several with stories that made mine look minor in comparison. Helen Marsh was compact and precise and spoke about legal rights and documentation with the authority of someone who had watched too many people learn these things too late. I did not share my situation in detail, but I listened, and I took notes on a small yellow legal pad, and by the time I drove back to Birchwood Lane, I had a list of 7 things I needed to document and preserve. That evening, I began a journal. Not a diary, a record. Dates, times, direct quotes where I could recall them precisely, observations, the dinner table remark, the tracked car, the thread about uncomfortable circumstances, the offer of $20,000 for a $35,000 debt. All of it went into a hardcover notebook that I kept in the gray suitcase behind my winter coats. Craig was watching television when I came home. He glanced up and then back at the screen. He did not know about Dorothy. He did not know about Helen Marsh. He did not know about the notebook or the journal or the 7 things I was now documenting with the methodical patience of a woman who had once spent 3 years auditing a federal agency's procurement records and found the discrepancy on page 412. He did not know what patience actually looked like. They came together on a Sunday afternoon, which told me it was planned. Craig had been in Phoenix, a second trip, shorter, he said, and Linda had spent the previous week moving around the house in a constrained way, our conversations reduced to practical things, dinner times, grocery lists, whether the recycling had gone out. I recognized it as the behavior of someone under pressure, someone rehearsing. They sat across from me in the living room. The coffee table between us, no folder this time, no documents. Just the 2 of them in their Sunday clothes, performing the thing people perform when they have decided that warmth is a tool. Mom, Linda began, and her voice was gentle, the voice I remembered from her childhood, from her good days. We miss you. We feel like there's this wall between us and we hate it. We've been doing a lot of thinking. I appreciate that, I said. We want to fix this. She reached across the table and put her hand over mine. Her hand was warm. I did not move mine. We love you. This isn't how we want things to be. You are our family. Craig nodded appropriately. He had a particular skill, I had learned, for making his face look like the inside of a greeting card when the situation required it. We've talked about what Craig said at dinner, Linda continued. He shouldn't have said it. He's sorry. I am, Craig said. He said it the way a man says sorry when he means this formality is now completed. And we want to make things right, Linda said. But Mom, and I say this with love, I really do. We think this legal process is hurting everyone. It's hurting our marriage. It's creating stress that I don't think is healthy for anyone, including you. Your doctor would probably say the same thing." And there it was. The move I had been waiting for, dressed in maternal concern. "The stress is bad for you." A 71-year-old woman with a healing hip and a lawyer. Surely she should not strain herself. "My health is fine, thank you," I said. "What we're asking," Craig said, leaning forward now, elbows on knees, the posture of earnest man-to-man, or in this case, man-to-mother-in-law discussion, "is that we handle this within the family. No more lawyers. We commit to a repayment schedule. Real, this time, on paper, whatever you want. And we release the lien. And everybody lives their life." "Patricia would need to review any new agreement," I said. "That's the thing." His voice was still controlled, but I could feel the edges now, the places where the warmth was thinner. "We're asking you to step back from the lawyer, to trust us, to trust your own daughter." I looked at Linda. She was looking at me with a face full of hope. Real hope, I thought, which was the saddest part. She wanted this to work. She wanted very much for the version of things where everyone sat down and agreed to agree. "Linda," I said, "I love you. I want you to know that clearly and without condition. And I want you to hear what I'm about to say as something that comes from that love." She waited. "I will not release the lien. I will not dismiss my attorney. The process will proceed as established. If Craig satisfies the debt in full, the lien is released immediately, and we never speak of it again. That is my position." The silence lasted perhaps 4 seconds. Craig stood up. The warmth was gone entirely now, not replaced by anger exactly, but by something colder and more deliberate. He picked up his phone from the cushion beside him. "You know what?" he said. "I tried. I genuinely tried. When this is over, and it will be over, don't expect any goodwill from this side of the table." "I'm not expecting goodwill," I said. "I'm expecting legal compliance." He walked out. The front door did not slam. He controlled that, at least. But I heard his car start hard in the driveway. Linda stood. Her eyes were wet. "I hope you know what you're doing," she said very quietly. "I do," I said. She went after him. I sat in the living room for a while after they left. The leaf shadows from the Japanese maple moved on the carpet. The house was very quiet. And here is the honest thing. I was frightened. Not of Craig, exactly. Not of his anger, which I had assessed as bluster with edges. But of the larger thing. The possibility of being wrong. The possibility that I was a stubborn old woman making a legal dispute out of a family problem that could have been handled differently. The possibility that Linda would not forgive me. The possibility that I was, in some way I hadn't examined fully, turning something real and irreplaceable into a transaction. I sat with that fear for a long time. And then a different thing happened, which I have thought about many times since. The fear did not go away, but it became something more useful. It sharpened into clarity. It reminded me of exactly what was at stake and exactly why I had started down this road. Craig Mercer had told me to go to a facility. Linda had looked at her plate. And I, Margaret Ellen Calloway, 71 years old, who had built a career and raised a child and managed her own life with care and precision for 5 decades, had a legal right, a documented right, and a very good attorney. The fear was there. It just wasn't in charge. I opened my notebook and wrote down the date, the time, and exactly what had been said. The 30 days passed. I was in Patricia's office again on a Tuesday morning. The same oak desk, the same botanical prints, the same coffee offered without asking. When she told me that Craig had made no payment and no qualifying response. "He sent a letter through an attorney he retained," she said. sliding a copy across the desk, arguing that the lien was entered under duress and that the original loan was, in fact, a gift. I read the letter. It was 3 pages. It used the word understanding 4 times and the word family 6 times, and it argued, with a confidence I found remarkable, that because I was Craig's mother-in-law and had voluntarily given money to assist the family, the promissory note should be construed as a gift instrument rather than a loan document, and the lien was therefore invalid. "Can he make that argument?" I asked. "He can make it," Patricia said. "It has essentially no legal merit. The promissory note is explicit, properly executed and notarized. The lien was recorded with the county. California courts are not sympathetic to retroactive gift reclassification arguments when written documentation exists, but it means this is going to a hearing." "Good," I said. Patricia looked at me over her reading glasses with the expression of a woman who has handled enough cases to recognize when a client has moved from hoping for resolution to preferring a hearing. "Margaret," she said, "I want to be certain you understand. A hearing will be a matter of public record. Your family situation will be examined. Your financial history may be disclosed." "I understand. Your daughter may be called as a witness." "I understand that too." She nodded. "Then let's prepare." The mediation hearing was scheduled for a Tuesday in May, 6 weeks out, at a private mediation center in downtown Glendale. Both parties were required to submit financial documentation in advance. Craig submitted his through his attorney, a somewhat selective accounting, Patricia noted, that foregrounded the business's recent difficulties while obscuring its longer-term assets. Patricia subpoenaed the county property records and the full mortgage documentation on 1847 Birchwood Lane. What those records showed was interesting. The mortgage on the Birchwood Lane property, taken out when Craig and Linda purchased it 9 years prior, had been refinanced twice. The most recent refinance 2 years ago had extracted significant equity, roughly $140,000. The stated purpose on the refinancing paperwork was home improvement and debt consolidation. The actual improvements to the home, as documented by permit records Patricia obtained, totaled approximately $12,000. The remaining equity had been used, as bank statements obtained through discovery made plain, to fund a series of commercial real estate investments, 2 of which had subsequently performed poorly. Craig had taken $140,000 out of the house that Linda had been led to believe was their primary family asset, used most of it on speculative investments, and said nothing to his wife about the specifics. When Patricia showed me these documents 3 days before the hearing, I sat with them for a long moment. "Does Linda know?" I asked. "Based on the joint account records, I believe she knows some of it." "The full picture?" "Probably not." I thought about my daughter for a long time that night. I thought about what it means to love a person who has allowed themselves to be diminished, who has folded the map of their own judgment to fit inside someone else's version of things. I was angry at her. I will not pretend otherwise. But the anger had a sorrow inside it, the kind that comes when you recognize yourself in someone else's mistake. The morning of the hearing, I dressed carefully. Navy blue. My good earrings. The pearl ones, a gift from my own mother 40 years ago. I had my folder, my notes, my documentation. I drove myself. The mediation room was neutral-toned and carpeted, with a long table and a mediator named Robert Ferris, retired judge, who had the patient eyes of someone who had heard every kind of human conflict and been surprised by almost none of it. Craig arrived with his attorney, a young man named Slade, who wore an expensive suit and projected confidence the way new practitioners sometimes do, with effort. Linda sat beside Craig, dressed in gray, not looking at me. Craig's attorney opened with the gift argument. He presented it fluently, with references to case law that were, Patricia later told me, selectively cited to the point of misrepresentation. He painted a picture of an elderly woman within a loving family arrangement who had, under the influence of a grief-adjacent estate planning, confused a family gift with a loan. He used the word confusion 3 times in reference to me. I watched Craig while Slade spoke. Craig was composed. He was good at composed. I had noted that throughout. He had the particular composure of a man who was confident that no one would look too closely. Then Patricia began. She did not use dramatic language. She did not need to. She presented the notarized promissory note. She presented the county lien filing record. She presented the witness signatures. She presented the bank records showing the 2 partial repayments, which, she noted, constituted acknowledgement of the debt under California law, eliminating any statute of limitations argument. Then she presented the refinancing documentation. The room changed when the refinancing documents appeared on the table. Slade had not seen those documents. I watched him understand this. I watched Craig's composure develop for the first time, small cracks. A stillness that was different from his earlier stillness, tighter, the stillness of someone reassessing. Robert Ferris, the mediator, asked Craig directly, "Mr. Mercer, the equity extraction of $140,000. Was Mrs. Mercer fully informed of the purpose of those funds?" Craig said, "We discussed it." Ferris said, "The joint account records indicate Mrs. Mercer's signature on the refinancing documents, but the fund disbursement was to an LLC account registered solely in your name. Can you explain that?" Craig looked at Slade. Slade did not have an answer for this. Linda, who had been looking at the table, looked up. "What LLC?" she said. Her voice was very quiet. I did not look at Craig when he answered. I looked at my daughter, and I watched something happen in her face. A reading, a recalibration, the expression of someone who has been shown a map they did not know existed and is working out, with precision and with pain, exactly where they actually are. The mediation did not produce an agreement that day. It produced instead a recess. Robert Ferris called it that, professionally and without drama, during which Craig and Slade stepped out to confer, and Linda sat very still at the table for approximately 90 seconds before she got up and walked out without speaking to anyone. I drank the water in front of me. Patricia made a note on her legal pad. The clock on the wall moved with the same patience it always had. When the session resumed 40 minutes later, Slade presented a revised proposal. Full repayment of the outstanding principal and interest, the $34,800, to be made within 21 days, in exchange for full release of the lien and closure of any related claims. Patricia looked at me. I nodded. "Mrs. Calloway accepts," she said. "Subject to receipt of funds in full, confirmed by wire transfer, within the specified 21-day period." Craig signed the settlement agreement without looking at me. His pen moved across the paper the way pens move when a person is trying very hard not to think about what they are signing. I signed my copy. I thanked Robert Ferris. I walked out into the May afternoon on Brand Boulevard, where the jacaranda trees were blooming purple along the median, and I stood for a moment in the warm California light and breathed. The wire transfer arrived on the 19th day. Patricia confirmed it and sent me the release documentation the same afternoon. The lien on 1847 Birchwood Lane was formally released. The debt was satisfied. The matter, legally speaking, was closed. But of course, the matter as a whole was not closed. Life is not a legal filing. In the 2 weeks between the hearing and the wire transfer, 3 things happened. The first was that Linda came to the guest room alone on a Thursday evening. She sat in the chair by the window, not on the bed, which I noted, and she looked at me for a long time before she spoke. What she said was, "I didn't know about the LLC. I want you to know that." "I believe you," I said. "I should have known. I should have paid more attention." "Yes," I said. "You should have." She looked startled. I think she expected comfort or qualification. I gave her honesty instead, because I thought she had earned it and needed it more than comfort. I love you, I said. That hasn't changed. But I need to say to you that what happened at that dinner table and what came before it for 2 years was allowed to happen, partly because you looked the other way. That is something you need to think about. She cried, quietly, for a few minutes. I gave her a tissue and did not rush her. Then she left, and I sat in the cedar-scented room and thought about everything I had just said, and found that I stood by all of it. The second thing was that Craig moved out. Not immediately, but by the second week after the hearing, the context of the LLC and the equity extraction had opened a set of conversations between him and Linda that I was not party to, but whose effects were audible through the walls. Long, low arguments, the kind that have no sharp edges, because they are really not arguments, but reckonings. Craig slept in the home office for 3 nights. Then he was at a hotel. Then he was, Linda told me briefly, staying with his brother in Thousand Oaks. His things went in boxes over a weekend. He did not speak to me during this process. I did not speak to him. There is nothing particular to say to a man who has been revealed, through the ordinary operation of documented fact, to be exactly what you suspected. The third thing was that I made a decision. With the lien resolved and Craig gone, the house on Birchwood Lane was in a complicated position. Linda had a mortgage, first position, as Patricia had explained, meaning primary. But the refinancing Craig had done had significantly increased the monthly payments. Linda's income, which came from her work as a freelance graphic designer, was not reliably sufficient to cover them. She came to me one evening, practical and not theatrical about it. I don't think I can keep the house. I thought about it for 3 days. Then I called Patricia and asked about the process of purchasing a property. The buyout was structured as a clean, private transaction, Linda selling to me at a fair market value, appraised by an independent assessor at $790,000. My liquid assets, combined with a mortgage I qualified for without difficulty given my income and credit history, made the purchase straightforward. The previous mortgage was satisfied. Linda received her equity, significant after Craig's refinancing had been accounted for, and that money gave her the cushion she needed to resettle. On the day the deed transferred, I sat in the kitchen of 1847 Birchwood Lane with my Earl Grey and looked out the window at the Japanese maple, still tilting slightly left, propped up now by a slightly more substantial stake than the one we had used 17 years ago, and thought, I live here now. I own this. Not from malice. I want to be precise about that. I had not come to Birchwood Lane planning to buy it. I had not wanted any of this. What I had wanted, and had always wanted, was to be treated as a person of dignity in my own family's home. What happened instead was that the situation clarified itself, step by step, through the ordinary operation of truth and documentation and an attorney who charged $400 an hour and was worth every cent. Craig Mercer, in the end, had told me to find a facility. I had found a deed. The first thing I did, after the deed was in my name, was repaint the guest room. Terracotta, the color of New Mexico landscapes I had always meant to visit. I moved my books in from storage, put my grandmother's quilt on the bed. It ceased immediately to be the guest room. It became mine. Dorothy came for dinner that Saturday. We talked until 10 o'clock, and neither of us mentioned Craig Mercer once. That, too, felt like liberation. I joined a hiking group through the library. There is a particular pleasure in walking with other people, in sharing a thermos of coffee at the top of a trail. I had forgotten that pleasure. I remembered it in the San Gabriel foothills, moving at my own pace, none of us in a hurry. I went to New Mexico in September. 8 days. The high desert north of Abiquiu looked like something painted by someone who did not believe in compromises. I ate green chile stew at a place serving it since 1952. I thought about how long I had let the fear of conflict override the knowledge of my own worth. Not with self-pity, with clarity. Linda found an apartment in Silver Lake with good light and a small balcony. She started therapy and told me so plainly over coffee in my kitchen. Hard, she said. Useful. Our relationship was different now. The smoothing gone, the strategic silences gone. More honest. The love was still there, cleaner, like a window that has been washed. Craig's situation did not improve. He moved from Thousand Oaks to Burbank after a falling out with his brother, took a salaried position with a firm in the valley. A life assembled from pieces of a previous one found to be built on assumptions. What I felt about this was not satisfaction. It was recognition, the ordinary operation of consequence. Helen Marsh invited me to speak at the senior advocacy group in November. I told them about the promissory note in the gray suitcase, about Patricia Owens, about knowing your own worth before someone else decides it for you. A woman named Patricia, 73, from Burbank, told me she had a loan outstanding with her own son-in-law and had never thought to formalize it. I gave her my attorney's card. The Japanese maple made it through the winter. In February, it put out its first leaves, that red-green of early spring, translucent in the light, the color of something just beginning. I had helped plant that tree 17 years ago. Now I had the deed to the ground it stood in, so that is how I went from a cedar-smelling guest room to the deed of the house with the Japanese maple. Here is what I learned. Dignity is not something other people grant you. It is something you document, defend, and, when necessary, enforce. I was 71 years old and frightened. I acted anyway. If someone is telling you, by word or by silence, that you are a burden, ask yourself, do they know who you actually are? What would you have done in my place? Tell me in the comments. Share this if it stayed with you. And thank you, truly, for listening. After 8 years in my house, my son won $45 million in the lottery. That same evening, his wife threw my things out on the street. Get out. We have a different life now. My son said nothing. I smiled. Did you see whose name is on the ticket? Good day, dear listeners. It's Clara again. I'm glad you're here with me. Please like this video and listen to my story till the end and let me know which city you're listening from. That way I can see how far my story has traveled. I had lived in that house for 8 years before everything changed. 8 years of folding laundry that wasn't mine, cooking Sunday dinners for people who stopped saying thank you somewhere around year 3. 8 years of watching my son Daniel become a stranger in his own kitchen, or maybe in his own skin. I'm not sure which happened first. My name is Margaret Collins. Most people call me Margie. I'm 68 years old, a retired school teacher from Columbus, Ohio, and I moved into Daniel's house after my husband, Gerald, passed. That was 2016. Daniel had insisted, "Mom, you can't rattle around in that house alone," he'd said, and I believed him, because he was my son, and I still believed most of what he said back then. The house was in Clearwater, Florida, a sensible ranch-style home on Pelican Drive, with a screened porch and a lemon tree in the backyard that never produced quite enough lemons. Daniel worked in insurance. His wife Jennifer worked in medical billing. They had no children, which I never commented on, because I was raised not to pry. Jennifer had made it quietly clear from the beginning that my presence was provisional. She never said it outright. She didn't have to. It was in the way she rearranged the kitchen after I organized it, in the way she introduced me to her friends. Daniel's mother. She's staying with us for now. For now. I filed that phrase away like a library card. For most of those 8 years, I made myself useful and small. I paid $300 a month toward utilities. Not rent, Daniel had said, just to help out. I babysat their 2 cats when they traveled. I weeded the garden and kept my room tidy, and did not complain when Jennifer repainted the guest bathroom, a color she described as spa taupe, and I would have described as the inside of a cardboard box. But in the last year before the lottery, something had shifted. I felt it the way you feel weather changing. Not dramatically, not all at once, but in small atmospheric adjustments. Jennifer had started making comments about space, about how it might be nice for Daniel and her to have room to breathe. She'd begun CCing Daniel on emails about retirement communities in the area, then leaving the browser open on her laptop when I walked past. She never looked up from the screen. She didn't need to. Daniel said nothing. That was the thing about Daniel. He had a talent for saying nothing at precisely the moment when something needed to be said. The lottery ticket happened on a Thursday in October. I had been to the Publix on Gulf to Bay Boulevard for milk and bread. Ordinary things, ordinary afternoon. I had $7 left over from the cash I'd taken out for groceries, and on an impulse I couldn't entirely explain, I stopped at the lottery machine near the exit. I'd played maybe 4 times in my life. Gerald used to buy scratch tickets at Christmas as stocking stuffers, but this was different. A Mega Millions draw jackpot at $45 million. I fed my $7 into the machine and took the ticket home and put it in the small ceramic dish on my nightstand, where I kept my reading glasses and a spare house key. I forgot about it for 3 days. It was Daniel who checked it. He'd been on his phone at the breakfast table on Sunday morning, and I'd mentioned offhandedly that I had a ticket from Thursday's draw. He looked it up. I watched his face go through several expressions I'd never seen on it before, cycling through them so fast they almost blurred together. Shock, then something electric, then a careful blankness that settled over his features like a curtain being drawn. "How much?" I asked. He turned the phone to show me. $45,200,000. I sat down. The kitchen chair scraped the tile and the sound was very loud. By Sunday evening, Jennifer knew. By Sunday evening, my suitcases were on the front porch. I hadn't packed them. I want to be clear about that. I came out of my bedroom to find 2 rolling bags and a cardboard box sitting on the porch concrete in the October humidity, my blouses visible through the mesh pocket of the larger bag. Jennifer stood in the doorway with her arms crossed, and she said, with a composure that told me she had rehearsed it, "It's time for you to find your own place, Margaret. We have a different life now." Daniel stood behind her. He was looking at the lemon tree. I looked at them both for a long moment. Then I smiled. Not the smile of a woman who has been defeated, but the smile of a woman who just remembered something important. "Did either of you," I said, "happen to look at whose name is on that ticket?" Jennifer's composure flickered. Just once. Just for a second. But that second told me everything I needed to know. I spent that first night at the Comfort Inn on US 19. I paid with my Visa debit card, the one attached to the small checking account I'd maintained in my own name since Gerald died, the one Jennifer didn't know about, because Jennifer assumed, as entitled people often do, that she knew the full dimensions of everyone around her. I took a room on the 2nd floor, set my suitcases inside the door, and sat on the edge of the bed in my coat because I hadn't taken it off yet, and my hands were shaking too much to manage buttons. I want to tell you I was angry. Anger would have been clean, useful, like a good pair of scissors. What I felt was more complicated than that. There was fear, a cold, specific fear, the kind that lives in the body rather than the mind, that says you are 68 years old and your suitcases are in a motel on a Tuesday, and you do not know what comes next. There was grief, because Daniel was my son, and I had changed his diapers and sat with him through 3 broken bones and a case of pneumonia in 1993, and he had watched Jennifer put my belongings on the porch and turn to look at a lemon tree. That was its own kind of loss, specific and hard-edged. But underneath the fear and the grief, there was something else, something quieter. The ticket was in my coat pocket. I had taken it from the ceramic dish on my nightstand when I packed, automatically without thinking, the way you take your keys when you leave the house. It was a habit of self-preservation I hadn't known I had until I needed it. I took it out and held it under the bedside lamp. Margaret E. Collins. The machine had printed it on the back when I'd fed in the quick pick request, along with the date and the draw number. In Florida, lottery tickets are bearer instruments. Whoever presents the ticket collects the prize. But the name printed on the back creates a legal record. I knew this because Gerald had been a careful man and had taught me to read fine print, and I had spent 30 years teaching 11-year-olds to read carefully and ask questions. I asked myself the question I should have asked the moment Daniel's face went blank. What exactly do they think is going to happen here? Did they imagine I would simply… what? Accept displacement? Hand over a $45 million ticket to keep the peace? I turned that possibility over in my mind the way you turn over a rock to see what's underneath. And what I found underneath was this. Yes, that is precisely what they imagined. They had known me for 8 years as a woman who paid her $300 a month and reorganized the kitchen and kept her opinions quiet. And they had mistaken that restraint for helplessness. Jennifer had calculated that a 68-year-old widow, suddenly homeless and overwhelmed, would fold. It was, I had to admit, not an unreasonable calculation. It was also completely wrong. I slept 4 hours. At 7 in the morning, I walked down to the motel's complimentary breakfast, watery scrambled eggs, a bagel, orange juice in a plastic cup. And I ate with the deliberate attention of someone who is preparing for a long day. Then I went back to my room and made a list. First, secure the ticket. I drove to a SunTrust Bank branch on Missouri Avenue and rented a safe deposit box. I placed the ticket inside, along with a handwritten note documenting the date of purchase, the store location, and the fact that I had used my own cash, the $7 remaining from my grocery money, drawn from my personal checking account 2 days prior. I had the ATM receipt. I put that in the box, too. Second, legal counsel. I did not know a lottery attorney, but I knew how to use the Florida Bar's online referral service, and by 10:30, I had an appointment for the following morning with a man named Robert Ashworth, who specialized in financial litigation and had, according to his firm's website, handled 3 previous lottery disputes in the state of Florida. His office was in Tampa. I wrote the address in my notebook in capital letters. Third, documentation. Back at the motel, I sat at the small desk and wrote out, by hand, a timeline of the previous 72 hours. The purchase, the drawer, Daniel's face, Jennifer's words at the door, the suitcases, the time. I included the names of the Publix employees I remembered. I noted that Jennifer had used the phrase, "We have a different life now," rather than asking me to leave, which suggested she already considered the money hers. I wrote 4 pages. I was not panicking. I realized with some surprise, completely calm. The fear hadn't disappeared. It was still there, a low hum in the background. But I had given it something to do. Fear becomes manageable when it has a task. I called my daughter-in-law's bluff in the only language that mattered. I called a lawyer. Whatever Jennifer thought she was doing when she put my suitcases on the porch, she had made one critical error. She had moved too fast. She had pushed me out of the house before anyone had claimed the ticket. before any legal steps had been taken, while my name was still the only one attached to those numbers. She had handed me 72 hours and an empty safe deposit box. I intended to use both. Robert Ashworth's office occupied the 14th floor of a glass building in downtown Tampa, with a view of the Hillsborough River that I noticed and then deliberately ignored because I had not come to look at scenery. He was a compact man in his mid-50s, with reading glasses pushed up on his forehead and the manner of someone who had heard a great many extraordinary stories and believed almost none of them until proven otherwise. I respected that immediately. I laid everything on his conference table: the ATM receipt, my handwritten timeline, the safe deposit box receipt, photographs I'd taken that morning of the Publix lottery terminal with my phone, which showed the machine I had used and its location in the store, and the single most important item, a screenshot from my bank's mobile app showing the withdrawal of $40 on Thursday, the grocery run, and the grocery receipt I had found at the bottom of my purse showing the total and the change. $7. That was the thread. $7 in cash, remaining after I paid for milk and bread and a small container of Greek yogurt, spent at a lottery machine at 2:47 in the afternoon. My name on the ticket. My money. Ashworth looked at everything for a long time without speaking. Then he said, "Has anyone else touched this ticket?" "No." "Has it been presented to the Florida Lottery Commission?" "Not yet." He leaned back. "Then you're in a strong position, Mrs. Collins. Florida law treats lottery tickets as the property of the purchaser. Your name is on the ticket, your funds purchased it, and you have documentary evidence of both. Unless someone produces a signed agreement stating that the ticket was purchased jointly or on behalf of another party, this is yours." He paused. "Is there any such agreement?" I almost laughed. "Jennifer doesn't make agreements. She makes pronouncements." He made a note. "I'd like to file for a temporary injunction today, preventing anyone from claiming or transferring this ticket except you. It's a precautionary measure. Essentially a legal flag that says this asset is under dispute, hands off. We can also notify the Florida Lottery that the ticket is pending legal review, so no claim can be processed without your attorney present." I said yes to both. Walking out of that building at noon, I felt the ground under my feet differently. Not triumphant, it was too early for that, but solid, purposeful. I had gone from a woman standing on a motel balcony with a lemon tree view and 4 pages of handwritten notes to a woman with legal representation, a protective injunction in progress, and an appointment the following week to formally claim the ticket with counsel present. What I didn't know was that Daniel had called the Florida Lottery's winner hotline at 9 that morning. I found out later, piecing it together from the attorney's communications and what Daniel himself eventually admitted, that he had called using the ticket numbers, which he had photographed on his phone before I'd taken the ticket from the nightstand. He'd been told the ticket had not yet been claimed and that he was welcome to present it at the Tampa prize office. He had not mentioned that the ticket was not in his possession. He had not mentioned my name. He had asked about the process for a family member claiming on behalf of the winner, and the representative, following standard protocol, had given him general information that he apparently interpreted as a roadmap. I learned about this phone call because my attorney learned about it. Because when Ashworth's office filed the injunction that afternoon, they flagged the ticket number with the lottery's legal department, who cross-referenced inquiries and found Daniel's call logged that same morning. Ashworth called me at 4:30. "Mrs. Collins," he said, and his voice had a new quality. Not alarm exactly, but a sharpened attention. "Your son made contact with the lottery this morning before our filing. He inquired about claiming procedures. I want you to understand what this means." He paused. "It means this is no longer a family misunderstanding. This is an attempted claim dispute. and it means whoever advised them, and someone advised them, Mrs. Collins, because that call followed a very specific line of questioning, knows what they're doing. I sat in my motel room with the phone against my ear and thought about Jennifer. Jennifer, who worked in medical billing and understood systems and forms and the language of institutions. Jennifer, who had repainted the guest bathroom spa taupe and introduced me as Daniel's mother. She's staying with us for now. Jennifer, who had stood in the doorway with her arms crossed and spoken with the composure of a woman who had rehearsed. She hadn't just pushed me out in a moment of greed. She had a plan. The difference between us, I realized, was that she had been planning in the days before. I had started planning in the hours after, but I had something she didn't. I had the ticket. I had my name. And I had documentation of a phone call made by a man who did not own what he was trying to claim, logged in the Florida Lottery's own system at 9:14 in the morning, 2 hours before my attorney filed papers that made any further attempt legally actionable. Point of no return, for both of us, but especially for them. That evening, I drove to the Publix on Gulf to Bay Boulevard. I went to the customer service desk and asked if they kept surveillance footage. The manager, a young woman named Destiny, according to her name tag, told me they retained 30 days of footage. I gave her my card, told her my attorney would be in touch, and asked her as politely as I knew how, not to erase Thursday afternoon. She looked at me with the particular alertness of someone who is watching something important happen. "I won't," she said. The formal claim process took place on a Wednesday, 11 days after Jennifer had stood in my doorway and told me I was no longer welcome in the life her husband's money was going to buy. Except it wasn't his money, and she knew it now. Robert Ashworth had prepared everything with the precision of a man who understood that lottery claims at this dollar amount would be scrutinized by attorneys on every side and by the lottery's own legal team. We arrived at the Florida Lottery District office in Tampa at 9 o'clock. Ashworth, his paralegal Sandra, and me in a charcoal blazer I had bought at a Kohl's the previous Friday, because I believed that a woman claiming $45 million should not do so in a cardigan. I had the ticket. I had the documentation. I had a brief, clear statement of claim. We were there for 3 hours. There were forms, verification procedures, identity checks, a review of the injunction filing. The lottery's legal representative was a measured woman named Patricia Huang, who asked careful questions and received careful answers. At no point did she seem surprised by any of it. I gathered she had seen disputes before. When we walked out at noon, the claim was filed. The ticket was registered in my name. The funds, pending a standard multi-week processing period, were designated for transfer to an account in my name alone. The injunction had done its work. Daniel's inquiry had been flagged and set aside. He had no legal standing. He had never had any. Ashworth drove me back to my car. Before I got out, he said, "They'll respond to this, Mrs. Collins. Today or tomorrow. Be prepared." "I know," I said. They called that evening. Daniel called first. His voice had a quality I hadn't heard since he was 17, and had dented Gerald's car and was trying to decide whether to confess or construct a story. It was the voice of a man caught between two women, and I recognized it, the way you recognize a piece of furniture from your childhood, with a kind of tired familiarity. "Mom." Just that at first. Then, "We need to talk about this." "We can talk," I said. "My attorney's number is on your phone now. You can have your attorney call his attorney." A silence. Then Jennifer's voice. She had been listening. Of course she had been listening. "Margaret." The composure from the doorway was still there, but thinner, like a coat worn one season too long. "We want to resolve this as a family. Nobody needs lawyers. We just want to sit down and— You put my suitcases on the porch, I said. That was your resolution. Another silence, longer this time. What came next did not come that evening. It came 2 days later, on a Friday afternoon, in the parking lot of the Comfort Inn, where I had been staying long enough that the front desk clerk greeted me by name. A man I didn't recognize approached me as I was carrying groceries from my car. A man in his 40s in a polo shirt, carrying a manila envelope, with the practiced ease of someone who delivers bad news for a living. He handed me the envelope. Inside was a document claiming that I had been living in Daniel and Jennifer's home as a dependent, that they had financially supported me for 8 years, that the grocery money in question had originated from a household account they jointly maintained, and that therefore the lottery ticket represented a jointly held asset. It was signed by an attorney. It was, my own attorney later told me, not entirely without legal creativity, though it was substantially without factual basis. Attached to the document was a handwritten note in Jennifer's handwriting. It said, "Don't make this ugly, Margaret. You have enough to live on. Take a settlement and everyone walks away clean." I read the note twice in the parking lot, standing between my car and a concrete pillar, a bag of groceries in my other hand. The settlement figure she had in mind was not specified. It didn't need to be. The message was the point. You are old and alone and outmatched, and the sensible thing is to take what we offer. I put the note back in the envelope. I called Ashworth. I read him the attached document over the phone. He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "They've hired Phil Dermott. He's aggressive, and he's expensive, and he knows his way around civil litigation." Another pause. "But their core claim is weak, Mrs. Collins. They're going to have to prove that household funds paid for that ticket. Your bank records show a personal withdrawal. Their grocery account. Do they have a joint grocery account?" "Jennifer managed the groceries," I said. "I contributed cash, monthly." "Do you have records of those contributions?" "I have 11 months of Venmo transactions to Daniel's account, labeled household contribution." A beat. "Mrs. Collins," Ashworth said, with the careful admiration of a man who does not often compliment clients, "you are very well organized." I took the weekend to rest. I drove to St. Pete Beach on Saturday and sat in a folding chair I bought at a drugstore and put my feet in the Gulf of Mexico. And I watched a pelican stand on a piling for 45 minutes without moving. And I thought about Gerald, who had loved pelicans, and I let myself feel everything that had happened without trying to organize it into a list. Sunday I went to church, a small Episcopal congregation near the motel, and a woman named Dolores sat next to me and shared her hymnal without being asked, and that small, ordinary kindness made me cry in a way that Jennifer's cruelty had not. On Monday, I called Ashworth and told him to proceed. The temptation came on a Tuesday, and it was more sophisticated than I had expected. Jennifer was smarter than I had given her credit for, which was itself a mistake I had been making for 8 years. I had mistaken her coldness for shallowness, her ambition for mere vanity. She was neither shallow nor vain. She was strategic, and she had spent 11 days recalibrating. She came alone, without Daniel, which was its own signal. She drove to the motel and knocked on my door at 11 in the morning, and when I opened it, she was holding a paper coffee cup from a place called Morning Tide, which she knew I liked because I had mentioned it once, 18 months ago, on a drive we had taken together to pick up Daniel's dry cleaning. She had remembered that. She had meant for me to notice that she remembered it. "I'm not here to fight," she said. "Can I come in?" I looked at her for a moment. This woman I had watched grow more confident in her own cruelty across 8 years, who had stood in a doorway with crossed arms and told me to leave. And I stepped aside. We sat in the 2 chairs at the small table by the window. She put her coffee down and folded her hands on the table with the deliberateness of someone who has rehearsed their body language. "I want to apologize," she said, "for how that night went. The way I spoke to you was wrong. I was, we were overwhelmed. The news, the number, it was a shock." She looked at me with an expression of measured vulnerability. "I know I've been difficult to live with. I know I haven't always been welcoming, and I'm sorry." I said nothing. I let the apology sit between us and looked at the St. Pete beach line visible through the window, where the morning was very blue and very clear. "The thing is," she continued, with a careful pivot that she perhaps thought I wouldn't notice, $45 million is the kind of thing that can destroy a family. We've both seen it happen to other people. And Daniel," her voice shifted, softer now, the approach of a woman bringing in her most reliable piece. "Daniel is devastated. He doesn't sleep. He thinks he's lost his mother. He watched you put my things on the porch," I said. "He looked at the lemon tree. She absorbed this. He was in shock. He's not the same person he was that night." "Which person is he now?" She paused, and I saw the calculation behind her eyes, the tiny adjustment of someone moving a chess piece. "He wants to see you. He misses you. We both do." She opened her purse and took out an envelope, which she placed on the table between us without fanfare, as though it were simply a practical item being passed along. "There's a number in there, a real number. Comfortable for life money, Margaret. More than you'd ever spend. We'd buy you a beautiful condo, set up a trust, handle the taxes. You'd never worry about anything again." I looked at the envelope. I didn't touch it. Here is what I felt in that moment. I felt the temptation, which would be dishonest to deny. Not the money. I had the money. My name was on the ticket. I didn't need their offer. What I felt was the older, deeper temptation, the one built into every mother who has loved an imperfect child for 44 years. The temptation to make the peace, to take the path that looked like resolution, to stop the machinery I had set in motion, which was expensive and exhausting, and which would, one way or another, end whatever remained of my relationship with my son. I sat with that temptation for exactly as long as it deserved. Then I thought about the porch, the suitcases, the blouses visible through the mesh pocket, the lemon tree. "Tell your attorney to call mine," I said. I stood up, picked up her envelope without opening it, and handed it back to her. "And take your coffee. It'll get cold." She looked at me for a long moment with an expression I had not seen on her face before. Not anger, not contempt, but something more unsettled. She had come in holding the coffee and the memory of morning tide and the soft mention of Daniel's sleeplessness, and none of it had worked, and she wasn't sure what to do next. She left without saying anything else. From my window, I watched her cross the parking lot. She walked slowly, which told me she was thinking. She sat in her car for 3 minutes before she drove away, which told me she was shaken. I called Linda Pierce that afternoon. Linda had been my closest friend since we'd taught 5th grade together in Columbus 20 years ago. She lived in Sarasota now, 40 minutes south, and she arrived at the motel at 4 o'clock with a casserole dish, a bottle of Riesling, and the particular energy of a woman who has been waiting to be useful. She sat across from me while I told her everything, from the lottery terminal at Publix to Jennifer's coffee and the envelope I had handed back. She did not interrupt. When I finished, she refilled my glass and said, "Margie, you know what you're doing is right." "I know," I said. "Do you?" She looked at me steadily. "Because you've got that look you used to get when a parent challenged a student's grade. Like you're sure, but you're bracing." I thought about that. I suppose I'm bracing for what comes next. "What comes next is they get ugly," Linda said. and then you win. She stayed 3 days. We walked on the beach. We played gin rummy. We drove to a farmer's market in Dunedin where a man sold Meyer lemon marmalade, and I bought 4 jars, because sometimes a thing means something, and you let it. Linda told me about her garden, about her new neighbor, about a book she'd read. She talked about ordinary life with the generosity of someone who understood that ordinary life was precisely what I needed to remember existed. When she left on Friday morning, she hugged me in the parking lot for a long time. "Call me every day," she said. I did. They came together the second time, which told me the first approach had been evaluated and found insufficient. Daniel called that Saturday morning to ask if they could meet with me. Not at the motel this time, but at a restaurant, neutral ground, somewhere public. The choice of venue was Jennifer's idea, I was certain. Public spaces imposed behavioral constraints that she calculated would work in her favor. They would seem reasonable, moderate, civilized, and I would be less likely to make a scene. She did not understand that I had no intention of making a scene. Scenes were not my instrument. I chose the time and place, a diner on Drew Street that I had eaten breakfast in twice during the previous week, and whose corner booth I had specifically identified as offering clear sightlines to both the entrance and the parking lot. I arrived 15 minutes early. I had my phone charged and my attorney's number queued. I ordered coffee and read 3 pages of the novel I was carrying before they walked in. Daniel looked worn. I will say that honestly. He was thinner than I remembered, which was strange given that it had been less than 3 weeks, and he held his shoulders in the way he had as a teenager when he had done something he couldn't undo. He slid into the booth across from me, and Jennifer sat beside him. And for a moment we simply looked at each other across a laminate table with a small plastic menu holder and a ceramic sugar dispenser. "Mom," Daniel said. His voice cracked slightly on the word. I had prepared myself for this. A mother's love for her son is not a light switch. I want to be honest about what it cost me, sitting across from him in that diner, to feel the pull of 44 years of love and then hold my position anyway. It cost something. I am not a woman made of stone. "I'm listening," I said. Jennifer had dressed carefully, not formally, which would have seemed threatening, but warmly, in a rust-colored blouse and small gold earrings. She had calculated her presentation to the last detail, and I noted each detail with the thoroughness of a woman who had spent 30 years teaching children to pay attention. What followed was a performance. I use that word not pejoratively, but accurately. It was structured, it had a beginning and a middle and a designed emotional arc, and it had been rehearsed. Daniel spoke first. About family, about regret, about how they'd let the shock of the moment override their judgment. He used the phrase, "in sickness and in health," with a slight fumble that told me he'd intended a different phrase and lost it. He talked about the guest bathroom. He said he thought of the house as my home too. He said, "We want you to come back," with an earnestness that I might have believed entirely if I hadn't been watching Jennifer's hands, which were folded on the table with a stillness that didn't match the emotion in his voice. Then the shift. Jennifer reached into her bag and produced a document, a single sheet, folded in thirds. She placed it on the table and smoothed it flat with her palm. "We had this drawn up," she said, with the tone of someone presenting a generous gift, "because we want this to be official, fair, in writing." I looked at the document without touching it. It was an agreement, a family settlement, it called itself, in which I would receive $8 million, held in a trust administered jointly by Daniel and a trustee of their choosing, dispersed in annual installments for my care and comfort. In exchange, I would withdraw the legal claim and reconvey the lottery ticket to Daniel Collins. 8 million out of 45 in installments under their administration. And there it was. The mask, briefly lifted. Not the reconciliation they had performed across 12 minutes of careful conversation, but the transaction they had been building toward since the moment Daniel's face went blank at the breakfast table. The coffee from Morning Tide had been the soft version. This was the hard version wearing the soft version's clothes. I looked at Daniel. He was looking at the document, not at me. "Daniel," I said quietly, "look at me." He did, and to his credit and his shame, he couldn't hold my eyes. "You were 4 years old," I said, "when you had pneumonia, 104 fever for 2 days. I sat next to your bed the entire time. I counted your breaths." I paused. "I just want to know that you remember that I am your mother. Not an obstacle. Not a transaction." He said nothing. His jaw worked. Jennifer's composure cracked just slightly at the edges, and what was underneath wasn't warmth. It was frustration, and it was cold. "Margaret." Her voice had dropped its warmth entirely. "You are 68 years old. This case will take years. It will cost hundreds of thousands of dollars. The stress alone." She let the sentence complete itself with a pause, which was the most honest thing she'd said all morning. "Is that a concern for my health?" I asked. "Or a projection?" She sat back. The mask was fully off now. Her eyes were flat and entirely focused, and she was no longer performing. "Take the settlement, Margaret. You'll be comfortable. You'll have a relationship with your son. What you're doing right now destroys everything." "What I'm doing," I said, "is claiming what is mine." She pushed back her chair and stood, and Daniel did the same, and I saw something pass across her face. Not defeat. Not yet. But the acknowledgement that this approach, too, had failed, and that she was running out of calibrated options and would soon be left with only uncalibrated ones. "You're making a mistake," she said. "You made yours on the porch," I replied. They left. I sat in the corner booth and finished my coffee, which had gone lukewarm, and I watched their car pull out of the parking lot. Then I took out my phone and called Ashworth and described the settlement document in detail. And I felt it. A thread of fear. Not the disabling kind, but the clean kind. The kind that tells you the stakes are real, that what you are fighting for is real, that this woman across the table was not finished. Jennifer would not stop. She would escalate. She would do things I hadn't anticipated, and some of them would be unpleasant, and I would have to stand through all of it. That fear sat in my chest on the drive back to the motel, and I let it stay there, because it reminded me of exactly what I was protecting. Everything Gerald and I had built across 40 years. My name on a lottery ticket. The right to decide what happened next. That fear was not my enemy. It was my compass. The deposition was scheduled for a Thursday, 6 weeks after the claim filing. By that point, Ashworth had built a case of considerable structural integrity. The public surveillance footage had been preserved and reviewed. It showed me, clearly and alone, at the lottery terminal at 2:47 p.m. on a Thursday in October, purchasing a ticket with cash. It showed no one else. There was no Daniel, no Jennifer, no indication of anyone directing or accompanying me. There was simply a 68-year-old woman in a green cardigan making an unremarkable purchase. There were my bank records showing the $40 withdrawal that morning and the corresponding grocery receipt. There were 11 months of Venmo contributions to Daniel's account, all labeled, all dated, all demonstrating that my household contributions came from my personal account, not, as their attorney Phil Dermott had argued, from a shared household fund that might conceivably give the household a claim on purchases made with its funds. There was the Florida Lottery's own record of Daniel's phone call at 9:14 a.m. on a Sunday, after he'd seen the ticket before I'd spoken to an attorney, in which he had made inquiries about claiming procedures without disclosing that the ticket belonged to someone else. And there was one additional piece of evidence, which I had not known about until Ashworth's investigator found it 12 days before the deposition. Jennifer had searched Lottery Ticket Ownership Dispute Florida on her phone at 8:42 p.m. on the Saturday before Daniel called the lottery on Sunday morning. The search history had been recovered through a process I didn't fully understand, but trusted absolutely. A records request attached to the civil proceedings, which Dermot had fought and lost. She had researched this before Daniel made the call, before I'd been put out on the porch. She had found the information, formed the strategy, and then waited for the right moment. The suitcases on the porch were not an emotional reaction to an overwhelming situation. They were step 2 of a plan. The deposition took place in Ashworth's conference room, with its view of the Hillsborough River, which I had learned to use as a focal point when I needed to think. Dermot was present, a large man, with a lawyer's careful neutrality and expensive cufflinks. Jennifer was present. Daniel was present. A court reporter sat in the corner. Ashworth sat beside me. I had worn the charcoal blazer again. Dermot began with Jennifer. Her testimony was polished and organized. She described the household finances, Daniel's income, my contributions, the years I had lived with them. She was careful and controlled, and she maintained her composure through the first 40 minutes with the efficiency of a woman who had rehearsed this too. Then Ashworth began his cross-examination. He was quiet and methodical, and he started far from the destination he was heading toward. He asked about household routines. He asked about the grocery account, whether she and Daniel maintained a joint grocery account, yes or no. They did. Whether I contributed to that account. She said yes. Whether I contributed in cash or digitally. She paused. Digitally, she said. He asked her to specify which account received my digital contributions. She named Daniel's personal account. Not the joint grocery account, Ashworth said. A fractional hesitation. Daniel transfers funds. When you say Daniel transfers funds, you mean from his personal account to the joint account. Yes. So Mrs. Collins's contributions entered Daniel's personal account first, not the joint household account. That's effectively the same thing. Is it? He let the question breathe. Then he moved to the surveillance footage, which had been entered as an exhibit. He asked Jennifer if she had accompanied Mrs. Collins to the Publix on Gulf to Bay Boulevard on the Thursday in question. She had not. He asked if she had given Mrs. Collins cash or a card for groceries that day. She said that Margaret sometimes used household funds. He asked if she could provide documentation of any such fund transfer on that date or within the 3 days prior. She said she'd have to check. He noted for the record that no such documentation had been produced in discovery. Then he said very calmly, "Miss Collins, can you tell me what you were doing at 8:42 p.m. on the Saturday evening before your husband called the Florida Lottery?" The room changed. It was subtle, the way pressure changes before a storm. Nothing dramatic, just a shift in the quality of air. I don't recall specifically," she said. Ashworth placed a document in front of her. "I'm showing you Exhibit 14, a record of internet searches conducted from a device registered in your name." He read the search term aloud. He read the timestamp. He looked at her across the table with the patience of a man who has been here before and knows exactly how long it takes. Jennifer looked at the document. She looked at Dermot. She looked at Daniel. In the space of those 3 glances, I saw the entire architecture of her plan, the strategy, the research, the performance, the coffee cup from Morning Tide, the settlement document folded in thirds, crack from load-bearing wall to surface detail. I was she started. I was looking up. We were concerned about what the... She stopped, started again. I was trying to understand the situation. Before the situation existed? Ashworth asked quietly. Dermot said, "Objection." And Ashworth said, with great politeness, that he was simply asking for clarification, and the court reporter typed. And Daniel looked at his hands, and Jennifer sat with the expression of a woman watching a building fall that she had spent months constructing. There was no dramatic outburst. That's not how these things end. What happened was quieter and more complete than that. Jennifer's narrative, the overwhelmed family, the shared household, the innocent shock, could not survive a timestamp. She had researched ownership law the night before Daniel made the phone call, which meant she had known before the call what she was attempting, which meant the entire framework of family misunderstanding was a construction, not a description. I sat in the charcoal blazer and looked at the Hillsborough River and said nothing. I didn't need to. The judge's ruling came on a Tuesday morning in February, and Ashworth called me at 9:15 to read me the relevant paragraph, which I have since memorized. The evidence presented establishes, by a preponderance of evidence, that the lottery ticket bearing draw number 847-MF was purchased by Margaret E. Collins using personal funds drawn from her individual account, at a location and time consistent with her documented movements, with no evidence of contribution, direction, or joint intent from any other party. The ticket is the sole property of Margaret E. Collins. The injunction is hereby made permanent. The counterclaim is dismissed. Dismissed. Not reduced, not compromised, not settled at a number that anyone in a restaurant had decided was appropriate for my care and comfort. Dismissed. I was sitting in a coffee shop when Ashworth called, a place called Harbor Grounds that I had found in my 4th week at the motel, and that had become something like a headquarters. I put down my cup and looked out at the water, and let the sentence complete itself in my mind a few times. The ticket is the sole property of Margaret E. Collins. $45,200,000. My name. The Lottery Commission had already confirmed the processing details. After the mandatory lump sum/annuity election, I chose the lump sum because I was 68, and Gerald had taught me not to count on installments. And after federal and state taxes, the amount that would arrive in my newly established individual account at a bank I had chosen, specifically because neither Daniel nor Jennifer had ever banked, there was $26,400,000. I sat in Harbor Grounds and had a second cup of coffee, and I let it be ordinary for a moment. Just a woman, a cup of coffee, a window. Then I called Linda. She didn't speak for several seconds. Then she said, "Margie," with the particular emphasis of a 60-year-old friendship, the kind that contains an entire history in a single inflection. "Yes," I said. She laughed, and I laughed. And 2 people at the next table looked over with the mild curiosity of people witnessing a happiness they can't explain. There were practical consequences for Daniel and Jennifer that I will describe with the factual care they deserve. Dermot had filed the counterclaim aggressively, which meant its dismissal came with a cost award. They were ordered to pay a portion of my legal fees, which were substantial. Dermot's own fees, which I was told were considerable, were entirely their responsibility. The legal action had taken nearly 5 months and generated the kind of paper trail and public record that attaches to a person in the way that ink attaches to fabric, indelibly. Daniel had, during the proceedings, been deposed himself. His testimony had not served him well. He had admitted to photographing the ticket numbers before I was asked to leave, which suggested premeditation rather than impulse. He had admitted that his Sunday morning call to the lottery had been made without informing me. Under Ashworth's quiet, methodical questioning, The story of an overwhelmed son acting in a moment of shock had not held its shape. I did not feel triumphant about Daniel. I want to be honest about that too. I felt something more complicated. A grief with firm edges. The kind you know won't soften entirely. The kind you eventually make space for, rather than resolve. He was my son. He had looked at the lemon tree. Those two facts would always exist in tension, and I had accepted that they would. Jennifer faced a separate consequence I had not anticipated and had not sought. Her employer, the medical billing company, conducted an internal review when the civil case generated local press coverage. The review found several discrepancies in billing practices associated with her account. Nothing that the civil case had touched, but the scrutiny the case brought had turned over rocks that might otherwise have stayed in place. She was placed on administrative leave in March. I learned this from Linda, who had been following the local court records with the thoroughness of a retired school teacher who had never lost her habit of research. I did not feel triumphant about that either, but I did not feel sorry. The day the funds cleared, a Thursday in March, nearly 5 months to the day after I had fed $7 into a lottery machine at a Publix on Gulf to Bay Boulevard, I drove back to that Publix. I parked in the same spot I estimated I had used in October. I went inside and bought milk and bread and a small container of Greek yogurt, because some things deserve a closing parenthesis. And at the checkout, on impulse, I bought a scratch ticket. I won $4. I laughed all the way to my car. By April, I had a home. Not a condo selected by Jennifer's careful eye for other people's limitations. A 2-story Craftsman in St. Petersburg, 6 blocks from the water, with a porch that ran the full width of the front, and a backyard with a fig tree and 2 raised garden beds. The house had 4 bedrooms. I needed one for myself, one for a study, one for Linda's visits. I painted it the blue of the Gulf on a clear morning, and left the 4th empty, because some spaces need to be empty before you know what to put in them. I hired a financial advisor named Constance Braley, and together we built a framework, a trust, an investment portfolio, a charitable giving account for causes I had supported quietly for years and could now support without being quiet. The local library, a literacy program in Pinellas County, a scholarship fund at the Columbus School where I had taught for 30 years. I bought good boots because my feet had suffered long enough, and that struck me as the proper first extravagance of a woman who had earned the right. Linda came in April and helped me unpack. We arranged the kitchen the way I wanted it, put a radio on the windowsill, and ate takeout Thai food on the living room floor. "This is your house," she said, looking around. "How does it feel?" I thought about it honestly, like a sentence that ends correctly. I volunteered Wednesday afternoons at an adult literacy program, helping a 41-year-old named Marcus work toward his GED. By August, he read me the first paragraph of his completed essay, and I was prouder of that than of almost anything else that year. As for Daniel and Jennifer, the legal fees had required refinancing the house on Pelican Drive at an unfavorable rate. Daniel lost a major insurance client in the quiet way business is sometimes lost, without explanation. Jennifer's administrative leave became a termination by May. The billing discrepancies had not survived a compliance review. She was working, I was told, as a medical office coordinator at a clinic in Clearwater. They were still together. That surprised me, and then didn't. People of a certain type stay because leaving requires confronting what you've done alone. I turned 69 in June. Linda drove up. Constance brought wine. Barbara from the walking group brought a cake. And we sat on the porch as the sun went down over the rooftops. Marcus sent a card. "Happy birthday, Mrs. Collins. Thank you for everything." He had addressed it in his new handwriting. Careful, large, getting better every week. I put it on the windowsill next to the radio. Some things you keep where you can see them. They mistook my patience for weakness, my quietness for ignorance, my age for irrelevance. And they forgot the most basic rule of a long life. The person who says least often knows most. I didn't win because of the money. I won because I kept my name on what was mine and refused to be moved from the truth. What would you have done? Standing on that porch, watching your suitcases in the humidity? Would you have taken the settlement? Kept the peace? I'd love to know. Leave a comment below. Share this story if it reached you. And thank you, truly, for listening.